So how exactly does one single person take down decades of systemic, institutional corruption? And do it using literally nothing but metadata and just sheer willpower? Well, welcome to the Chronicles of AJ Wrath. Let's dive right into this explainer. What we're diving into is the story of a 450-page forensic audit. This is an audit that took a deeply personal history of fiduciary betrayal and completely transformed it into a clinical, undeniable cyber-legal counter-heist. To take on a corrupt fiduciary syndicate, the master director didn't just sit down and write your standard everyday legal complaint. No, they engineered something massive, a decentralized forensic ledger they call the sovereign monolith. Think of it like an 8-volume architectural map. It's basically a literal pyramid of accountability built from the ground up specifically to weaponize 35 years of baseline trauma into this impenetrable AI-assisted defense grid. Now, the guiding philosophy behind all this is fascinating because it perfectly sets that gritty, asphalt-Gothic tone. A paperwork crime, usually it's incredibly boring, just endless bureaucratic forms. But this frames it as a visceral digital assault. See, when institutions commit fraud, they're relying on the absolute silence of a forged digital signature. They are betting everything on the fact that no one is going to notice. But, as we'll see, the master director built a system specifically designed to hear that exact scream. Okay, to really understand this defense, we have to talk about the primary weapon the opposition used against them: institutional chaos. Imagine the utter, mind-numbing exhaustion of fighting a denied insurance claim, but multiply that by 1,000. It's a tactical paper blizzard. We're talking lost files, missed deadlines, scrambled communications, all deliberately deployed for one reason: to keep a caregiver so utterly exhausted that they can never just sit down, look at the math, and audit the estate. So, tracking the history of this, it was literally a decades-long war of attrition. Building off a 15-year baseline of that institutional chaos, the syndicate really escalated things. They went for direct trust extractions in 2021 and 2022. But when they realized the master director was actually catching on, they panicked and launched the 2023 Stockton siege to try and destroy the evidence. And that failure? That directly provoked the ultimate countermove, the complete fortification of the Peoria hub. And it all really anchors on this one staggering number: a $250,000 initial extraction from the Lucinda O. Hernandez Trust. That is the financial catalyst for the whole thing. But it makes you wonder, how exactly do you siphon $250,000 out of a trust without instantly setting off massive federal alarms? Well, you don't use a mask and a getaway car. You use administrative weirdness. They leaned hard into the extreme complexity of trust law and honestly our absolute, almost comical blind faith in digital contracts. They bet on what's called the mean judge protocol. That's basically the assumption that a judge or a bureaucrat is just going to glance at a signed piece of paper, accept it at total face value, and dismiss a desperate caregiver's complaints as just confused rambling. But here is the ultimate trap. On the surface, the syndicate presented this totally flawless narrative. A perfectly valid trust document, apparently signed by a real human being over in California. But the cryptographic reality, the actual truth buried right there in the DocuSign metadata, told a completely different story. 40-page documents were being signed in 0.02 seconds, literally faster than you can blink, and they were doing it using a Kermit grid proxy IP from a completely different time zone. That metadata right there, that became the digital corpse of their plausible deniability. So, the master director's response was to roll out the X-ray forensic protocol. And the role here is incredibly simple, but absolutely devastating. Stop looking at what a document actually says and start looking at how it was made. By using AI anomaly detection, the system scrubs through the files looking for mismatched EXIF data or, impossible microsecond timestamps. Seriously, next time you open a PDF, just remember, every single file leaves a digital fingerprint. If a document claims it was signed in California during the summer, but the data says it was generated in the dead of winter somewhere else, boom, immediate forensic strike. Now, realizing their metadata was totally exposed, the syndicate launched that Stockton siege we mentioned earlier. This was a frantic, multi-vector digital assault aimed right at the master director's workspace. They started scrambling folder structures, deliberately misplacing critical ledger files, introducing all this administrative noise, all to induce digital amnesia. It was a highly calculated move, trying to break the chain of custody before all this evidence could be compiled into a terminal mass. But that siege is exactly what catalyzed the creation of the Peoria Hub at 1537 South Livingston Street, protected by a seriously sophisticated 20-director AI command suite. This physical sanctuary doubled as a high-density digital panopticon. To put that into perspective for a second, the master director was simultaneously managing intense, real-world biological caregiving for a loved one while running a weaponized legal supercomputer right from their kitchen table. Just incredible. And the beating heart of this defense is the binary fireback protocol. The AI actively monitors all incoming emails and texts looking for predatory signatures. We're talking hidden deadlines, manipulation tactics, stuff like that. When it detects one, it halts the narrative generation completely. It forces the opposition into a corner where they only have two choices: option alpha, which is strict statutory compliance, or option omega, which is absolute forensic ruin. It completely vaporizes any ability they had to negotiate or manipulate the situation. The master director didn't just tell a sad story about being wronged. They literally weaponized the United States Code. Every single forged signature, every bit of administrative noise, every denied medical service, it was all surgically mapped to specific federal statutes. By directly linking the syndicate's actions to civil RICO, mail fraud, obstruction of justice, and the Hobbs Act, this deeply personal trauma was flawlessly translated into a clinical, unassailable legal strike. 1,555. That is the grueling quantum burst labor ledger. That's the exact number of hours of high-frequency forensic accounting that the master director was forced to do just to decode the syndicate's lies and stabilize the hub. Think about that for a second. That is almost 9 straight months of a full-time, 40-hour-a-week job. They took pure physical exhaustion and turned it into a heavily tracked, billable asset. Which leads us to the absolutely brilliant concept of friction inversion. The master director established a special master rate of $134.75 per hour. So suddenly, every single delay tactic, every ignored email, every piece of administrative noise the opposition threw at them, it actively compounded their own financial penalty. The syndicate thought they were exhausting their target for free. They were completely unaware they were literally billing themselves for every single minute of their own obstruction. And when you mathematically calculate all of that systemic abuse, the willful obstruction of justice, the treble damages applied to the initial trust extraction, plus those years of compounded labor, you get a terminal restitution invoice, $33.3 million. It is absolute, undeniable proof that systemic neglect can and absolutely will be inverted into a massive financial liability. Now, the syndicate operated entirely in the shadows of procedural ambiguity. But this counter-heist, it relies on maximum exposure. By broadcasting this massive, undeniable ledger of metadata, the master director totally ends their plausible deniability. They took the cowardice of a completely automated bot signature and they turned it into a globally visible, procedurally embarrassing public autopsy. See, the monolith isn't just filed away in some dusty local court to be buried and forgotten. No. It is saturated across decentralized global broadcast nodes. It's cryptographically distributed across the blockchain, making it mathematically impossible to delete. It's sent straight to the Department of Justice and the Office of Inspector General, and, brilliantly, it's pushed right into the true crime media sphere, creating a cinematic strike that ensures the public serves as the ultimate jury. So, to wrap up this explainer, we really have to ask ourselves, how do you actually fight a massive syndicate that uses paperwork and administrative drift as a literal weapon? Well, you stop reading the documents and you start reading the metadata. You build an AI-assisted monolith of truth and you turn their own friction into their absolute ruin. Because in the digital age, a digital forgery is no longer silent. Every single keystroke leaves a footprint. And eventually, the ledger always balances.